Thank you very much for the kind words. So I'm Ingmar, or Ingmar Björkman. Great to see you all here. I have 20 minutes for this presentation, and what I'm going to talk about is related to the topic, of course, people management in multinational corporations. But I'll go a bit beyond talking about corporations, because as I will be arguing, much of my work, much of the work in this area has relevance way beyond corporations, for NGOs, for any kind of organization, including universities. And what I will actually do here is try to link that to my current job, the most important job I have, and the reason why I don't get to do what I really love, and that is to teach and do research, namely to try to manage the business school. People management in multinationals or multinational corporations, that's what I've mostly done work on over the last 15, 20, 25 years, research-wise, teaching-wise, and also when working with different corporations and organizations. Obviously, a good starting point for this kind of lecture is to ask, well, why study this kind of topic? Why study people management? Why study people management in multinational organizations? Why people management? Well, a simple starting point is that organizations are nothing without people. It's really the people in organizations that make that organization to what it is. And obviously what people do, which of course is again then related to what we do to manage people, has tremendous impact on the kind of value that organizations are created, be that for customers, be that for students, be that for society at large. So we need to understand this topic area of its pure importance. But in addition to looking at this from an organizational point of view, it's important to understand people management. It's also important to understand how organizations manage people from the point of view of individuals. Individuals are individuals. They are not only resources, human resources. So how do organizations manage people, and how does that relate to well-being? How does that relate to stress? How does that relate to the likelihood of people surviving for more than X number of years? A number of sort of dependent variables that are highly relevant for the individuals working in organizations we can also ask within this kind of research stream. And then finally, why study multinational organizations or multinational corporations? Because they are tremendously complex. So if you study small organizations, there might be certain aspects that we miss out on that are relevant for the commerce of this world, but also for the aalto-universities of this world, where we have a number of people from different parts of the world coming together, trying to create value in this kind of organization. So that's a starting point. But before we go to me trying to shed a little bit of light on this, let me reflect a little bit on what I see as our role as professors. Our role as professors is, of course, to push the boundary in terms of cutting-edge research, and based on that, to contribute to the learning, the development of people we work with, students we work with, participants in programs and so on, and to society more general. I think if the only thing we focus on is cutting-edge research being published in the top journals of this world, it is not the reason why society actually invests a lot in us doing so. So for taxpayers, and in terms of what I see as really an important part of the identity of being a professor, is to contribute to society beyond our staring at our own research. And related to that then is, what is the kind of work that allows us to do so? In management studies and international business, international management that I'm working on, theories, concepts are really important. And I have to confess, I'm a true believer in theories and concepts when it comes to allowing us as scholars, but also as scholars trying to influence society through students, through managers participating in executive programs, through the kind of way in which we present our research findings, how that relates to what is actually taking place out there. Because the concepts allow us, give us certain glasses as individuals, as managers, as employees, as team members, to look at the world, which again is likely to influence how we are acting in our different roles. So what I'll do here is to take a little bit of the research that is done and has been done on people management in multinational corporations and try to apply that to what it is to try to manage a business group, basically. Okay, so bear with me for trying to do something that perhaps goes a little bit beyond what typically is the case in these kind of presentations. So, people management. What is the management of people or management of human resources? A simple way to start shedding light on that is to take the traditional view, which is that it has to do with what are organizational practices when it comes to managing people. This is a simple flowchart trying to link a little bit across the different practices that I'm sure all of you recognize. In every organization, we are trying to recruit people, select people to the organization. They have certain tasks. We might specify those tasks a bit better. That relates to what they produce, their performance, if you wish, how they do, also from an individual point of view, their well-being. This is then being evaluated. We talk about performance appraisal or assessment, which in turn then is linked to rewards, bonuses, career progression, and so on. And on the other hand, also linked to development activities and part of the organization. So we work with our employees to develop them, to support them in different ways. And then there is a feedback loop back to selection. So we select people for new positions in organizations based on how well they do via training programs, via coaching programs, and so on. And then we could add to this, as a view of people management, a number of different other things that also can be studied and have been studied. So some of the research in this field has been, and it's totally legitimate, focusing what do organizations do, why do they do it, how do they do it, and how does that relate to different kind of outcomes at the organizational level, at the unit level, at the team level, and at the individual level. But that's, to me, too simplistic. If you really want to shed light on what people management in multinational organizations is about, you need to go beyond that. And what we have done with some colleagues, and thanks Teemu for introducing this, and this is actually something we use as a framework for our book. And to me, this is one of the examples of what I think we as faculty members, as professors, should be focusing on, trying to write up, make sense of our view of the field in terms of textbooks. So if you have textbooks like this and you sell and it's being used throughout the world, that at the end of the day is likely to have more of an impact on the world than whatever H index you might have or number of citations or so on. So in this book, we try to sort of provide a framework for thinking about people management. Here you will recognize some of the HR practices themselves, simple stuff. But what we also do is to argue that we need to think in terms of guiding principles, how to think about human resources practices or people practices. And there we have three different kinds of principles that we focus upon. First, something we call internal consistency. How do they relate to each other? How do they support each other? So how you recruit people, related to how you assess or appraise people, how you develop people, how you reward people, and so on. That's one aspect of consistency. And there are strong arguments for there being some consistency, some linkages across. Another one is consistency over time. If the organization changes how it evaluates people, it changes how it develops people from one year to the next, that's sending different signals to employees, and it's also unlikely to have much effect long term. So consistency over time is another one. Differentiation. Differentiation across employee groups. So do you in a corporation manage your R&D engineers the same way as you manage your salespeople, the same way as you manage your assistants? And what about then taking, and this is now really taking us into the international realm, how do you manage people in different units? Do you manage people in the same way in Finland as in China? You take Kone elevators, or the Kone corporation that goes into China. Is Kone going to manage people? Should Kone manage people? And are the effects of how they manage people the same? And I won't throw too many things at you, but this is just a typical way in this field to look at that. There's pressure between the global, the standardized, the corporate way to do things, and the local, where you have culture differences, institutional differences, economic differences, and so on. And there are real questions and no simple answers in terms of how to do this. We can apply this also to, let's say, Aalto University. So you have the group headquarters policy. Should the art school manage people the same way as is done throughout? What's the pressure to standardize policies? There are strong arguments for doing things differently because of the differences in terms of logic, in terms of the characteristics of the unit. At the same time, there are also logics related to doing things the same way. So no simple answers there. So that's an example of differentiation. And a third example, which is also a very important one, how does our organization differentiate itself from others? How does Kone differentiate itself from Otis elevators? How does Aalto differentiate itself from, let's say, St. Gallen University or Delft in terms of how it manages people? Because this will have implications, I would argue. Dualities, that has to do with the fact that if you go too far in one direction, it has problems in terms of consistency becoming too stifling. Differentiation, too much differentiation is also problematic. So these to us are important things to think about when it comes to managing people. I won't spend much time on the rest here. This has to do with what's the role of the people function or the HR function. Let's skip that here. But these are important. What are outcomes? What are we looking for? We are looking for ways in which people management practices relate to the competencies of individuals, of teams. We are looking at how they relate to the commitment they have to the organization, to the team, to the superior, to the tasks at hand. And we are looking at long-term effects on competitiveness of the organization. So these are the kind of things, if you take a broader perspective on people management, that are relevant. Let me now just very quickly go through two things, two examples. And the two examples are how to attract people, and then the second one, how to manage change, based on the work here. And when it comes to managing or to attract people, it has to do, and that's sort of what I'm trying to bring to the table here, it has to do with the kind of value proposition that you offer to employees that people find enticing and therefore attract them to the organization and hopefully also make them stay. And this in turn is related then to the psychological contract that you build with employees. Those are expectations about what you get from the organization and what you have to give to the organization. Okay? And the idea here is that there has to be a balance between expectations, what you get from the organization, and what you give to the organization. Why is this in turn important? Well, we know from loads of research that if you break that psychological contract, people's commitment will go down, the likelihood of them leaving the organization will go down, and their performance will go down. So you need to put in place a value proposition that attracts people, build a psychological contract which is aligned with the strategy, what you try to do, but at the same time it can't be too far away from reality. And here is, this is the whole line of argumentation that I'll try to present. So how does that relate to, and what are sort of ways to think about this in the context of a university or a business school? Well, here's basically our strategy. This is our people strategy in the business school. On one slide, this has been discussed in the business school. We're trying to communicate that. We're trying to get people in the organization to the extent that they buy into it, and at least so far, people seem to buy into it. This is the reason why we get people to join us, not Rotterdam, not St. Gallen, not Stockholm, not whatever, Yonsei in Korea or whatever. And I think based on all the research we have, this is a sound way to think about these issues. Of course, the jury is still out on whether or not it is successful. So this is one example, and we could spend lots of time, and I think we are actually spending lots of time thinking about these issues in our school. The second one is this one, or actually this is the answer. The question is, how do you go about to get an effective implementation of decisions and strategies, basically manage change? And the simple answer, the simple rule that I'm trying to propose here is that E equals Q times A. You might remember another E. E equals
MC squared.
MC squared. Good. The audience is now engaged in the discussion, which is always important in lectures. So what is E equals Q times A? And why do I argue that this helps explain the extent to which a firm, an NGO, a university, a business school, a department, a unit, a research team is actually successful? Well, E equals effectiveness, Q equals quality of analysis and solution. So you basically make good decisions what to do. And then what's the final one? Anyone? What's A? Jorma, what's A here?
No idea at all.
Anyone?
That's the reason I'm sitting here.
Action?
Yeah.
Could be. Or it actually has to do with how do you get action.
Person.
Anyone? Person?
Attitude.
It's actually acceptance of the decision. So if you look at what we know about management of implementation, management of change, it is basically to a very large extent captured in this very simple formula. So if you want to have effective organizations where you effectively implement decisions, you need to, yes, of course, make sound decisions, but you need to get acceptance to that decision. And if acceptance goes towards zero, what happens to the dependent variable here?
Of course, goes to zero.
It goes to zero. How do you do it? And here is the suggestion based on research, sort of the framework or the theory. Think in terms of fair process in the process of leading up to the decision. So there's lots of work in organizational psychology, management on fair process. And basically what it says is that when people have the perception that the process has been fair, they are more committed to the organization, they show higher trust in their superiors, and the support of the decision or the plan question is much higher. This actually explains roughly 50% of the variance in the dependent variable. It's extremely powerful. And then, of course, the question that you're posing, so what to do? Well, here is my simple, and this is now a little bit consultancy speech. Here's the 5E that I throw at you. This is based on work done by a colleague of ours. And basically, it has to do with how do you engage people in the process? How do you explore alternatives and rule them out? How do you explain the decision? How do you then manage the expectations of people based on those decisions? And how do you follow up and evaluate what you've done? And of course, this has to be done in a way which is believable. If the perception is that you try to engage people, you know from the beginning precisely which alternative you're going to choose, and so on, then it backfires. But doing this, generally speaking, tends to lead to a positive outcome. So the question is, of course, for any organization, for KONE, for Aalto, for Greenpeace, for the city of Helsinki, is how well do you do? And use this sort of a way to think about it. So what I'm trying to do here is to argue that people management in multinational organizations is important to study. What I've tried to argue is that research should, for us as professors, to do the kind of role that we should have in society, that should be the basis for us trying to diffuse that knowledge, spread that word, and actually make an impact. And what I've also tried to argue is that in the couple of examples I've given here, that quite concretely, you take some research in one certain area, you think of, for instance, an organization like Aalto-University, and it has lots of applications. So there's nothing as practical as a good theory, or there's nothing as practical as good research. But we need to make that translation. We need to focus on that also in our day-to-day work. So, and with that, thanks. If anyone is interested in anything of this or anything else related to people management, this is one source in which we're trying to put that together. Thank you very much.